right.
Go for it.
Thanks. All right. So, Amelia, first, if I could just echo what Tim was saying and say thank you for joining us. And to start, would you mind just describing your work and introducing yourself once again?
Sure. So I'm Amelia LoDolce. I'm the executive director of Vines. I joined the staff as a board member in 2016. Prior to that, was a volunteer and a board member of the organization since pretty close to the beginning of the organization in 2017.
Thank you. So with that rich history with Vines, how have you seen the organization grow and your role and position grow in general?
So over time, really, I kind of started just filling in where there was a need. And I'll have a presentation, a small PowerPoint to go through to give folks a little bit of history of the organization. But essentially, when we got started, 2007, the organization was a fiscally sponsored project of Earth Day Southern Tier. And over time, we started developing our own board and infrastructure, but early on, it was just those of us who were helping run some of our community gardens, running the nonprofit operations. And that changed over, it took us about 6 years to become our own nonprofit, and then another 3 years before I came on staff. So with that, why don't I'll pull up the PowerPoint to share some more details with y'all. All right. So just for folks, information, our full name is Volunteers Improving Neighborhood Environments, and that is our name because we started off all volunteer, but all of our programs are run with a tremendous amount of volunteer labor, and it's really still core to who we are and what we do. Our mission is to create a just and sustainable food system, and we do that by creating gardens where people can grow their own food, leading educational trainings, youth development, programming to support folks in achieving food security, not only through being able to access food directly, but by supporting them in their development and their work to achieve their own goals. And as I mentioned, we have a tremendous amount of volunteer service that goes into our work. Our goal is to see less sites like this in the area, or maybe just to counter the fact that we have a lot of food deserts in our area that have, where most people are getting food at, say, bodegas, corner stores, where food is highly processed. There's a premium to the cost of the food at those locations. We want to see more sites like this throughout our community. And these are all pictures of our different garden sites, and all within the city. These 3 pictures are all within the city of Binghamton. So I think one of the things that's cool about urban agriculture is that it's like unlikely, that you would have a farm right in the city, and that's something really that surprises people, that you can grow food in the city, you can have a farm in the city. But having our food production so separate from where people live is a problem, right? Because it is both enriching for us as human beings to be able to get our hands in the soil and produce our own food, right? It's therapeutic, it helps with food sovereignty, all of these things. But it also beautifies our neighborhoods, right? And it reduces the amount of distance that our food is traveling from farm to fork, which helps with environmental sustainability, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. There's a lot I could say about why our work is important, but I know you're all here to hear more about how we fund this work. So just, last thing I'll say is that we do have a number of different programs. You can learn all about these on our website, but we help people grow food. We help people learn how to do that. We employ teens to grow food at our urban farm for the community, which we distribute through our farm share program, which is like a veggie subscription. And we also build raised beds at people's homes, and we sell for 2 other farms in the area also. So feel free to ask about the what of what we do as well. But I want to give you a little bit of a history, so you can get an idea of what it's taken to get to the point where we are, which, at this point I would say we're in our teenage years. So we've learned a lot. We're heading to our 20s. Like, we know how much we don't know. I think that's what you learn at that stage in life, right? I know now I don't know everything. I think actually we knew that from the beginning. But, at this stage, we're in a much more comfortable place than we were 5 years ago in terms of some stable funding that comes back year to year, year after year. We have some really dedicated donors, but we are still, the organization that we are this year is different than the organization we were last year, right? We're still in a phase of a lot of growth. And I think some folks on the call can understand that, are going through that. So don't forget that even though we might seem like we're really established, you can see this timeline. We are now 17 years old, but we didn't become our own nonprofit completely independent until 2013. So 11 years ago, yes. But I'll show you our staffing structure over that time. There has been a lot of change. And we have slowly grown our programs over the year as we've gotten established. We feel that we're secure in the funding for the programs that we do have, so that if we add another program, we're not at risk of not having enough money to run what we're already doing, and then being, falling short on our promise to the community in terms of the services we're providing. So we started off with community gardens, brought in educational workshops, started our urban farm after that, and then added on other programs as we got more established. Our farm was established for 3 years before we started our farm share program, selling our food in box subscription boxes. We knew, even just from a production standpoint, we needed to figure things out to be able to consistently offer a high quality product in that in the form of a veggie subscription program before we went ahead and did that. So remember, it's always okay to take your time and really get your bearings, feel that your program is really hitting its stride, achieving the quality you want before you take on more things. To highlight the people power of our organization and how that looked, I mentioned early on it was all volunteer. We had a working board. I was a board member for 8 years, and I would literally come in and help run staff meetings and do finances and write grants and work on grant reports in the evenings when I was off work from my normal job. So the board members really pitched in and filled some of the role that a more mature organization would have staff doing. At this point, my board doesn't do that. They're in charge of helping us raise money, manage relationships with donors, provide oversight for the governance of the organization. But it wasn't until 2010, we had some part-time seasonal folks that were working for us just about 10 weeks out of the year. And 2013 was the first time we had members on our own payroll. Prior to that, we hired people through other partner organizations. They put them on their payroll and we contracted with them. So we leveraged the support of others to help us get going. So if it wasn't for Broome County Gang Prevention, Vines really couldn't have done what we did those first couple of years in the 2010s with our youth program. So I came on in 2016, so I've been here now for 8 years as a paid employee. And really that's when you can see a huge uptick in both the number of people we served, the number of staff we have on board, and then also fundraising. So it's really hard to have your program staff where they're doing the work and on the ground to be doing all of that fundraising work. I will say we still do not have a paid development person. It's still all under me. And then I have another staff member who provides some help with that. But to give you an idea of what our income streams look like now, we are primarily funded by grants. And at this point, we're very lucky to have found some grants that are kind of secure and stable from year to year. And then others that are kind of one-offs that we pull in to help fill some of the gaps and help with program expansion. But about 10% of our program revenue, or our income revenues from donations, and another 4% from fundraising. So close to 15% of our budget is coming from money that we're going out and asking the community to invest in us. Another 9% is program income. That's the produce that we sell. That's unique. We're able to do that because we have a product we can grow and sell. Not every nonprofit is going to have this, but even within some of our programs, like our community gardens, where we have people renting plots, or our Green Thumb workshops where people come and learn about gardening, we ask people to support the program if they are able, and then we have a sliding scale. So basically, if you can't afford to make a donation to support the program, you don't have to. But this allows for those who can to make a contribution to support the work. I did make a note there that nonprofits can charge for services. That is legal. If that's legal, we can have program income. We just can't make a profit that we then distribute to, say, board members. But we personally, we have a sliding scale options for all of our programs to promote equity. All right, maybe I'll save that one, Allison. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
I kind of wanted to loop back around to the personnel issue that you were talking about, of how even today you don't have a full-time development staff member.
Yeah.
And so in what way do you leverage volunteers, board members, and like community members in the volunteer fundraising process?
Yeah, so I have my board members help me write our mail appeal letters. They are also they come in to help fold the letters and put them in envelopes to get them out to folks. They also will write notes on the letters. So if they know someone that's on our list, as they're before we send those out, they will take some time to write a little note to somebody. Those notes make a big difference in somebody when they open up that envelope, seeing it and noticing, oh, Chris says happy holidays. That's so nice. Oh, I should really make a donation. And then in addition, any donation that we receive over $100 or over, I have a board member make a phone call to that donor and thank them. So in our donor management software, when we get a donation in over 100, the person doing that puts a task in there that pops up in my email and tells me to assign a board member to thank them. And I'll then send that over to one of my board members, ask them to send me any notes from their conversation. And if something's happened, like, their daughter got married and they were excited to share that, I'm going to put those notes in my donor software. So I know about that. Next time I see that person, I can make a comment about that, congratulate them, and have a stronger relationship. And then also with our fundraising events, our board members are involved in putting on those fundraising events. And then when we do donor thank you events, they help get all the food, set up the space for the event, etc. So I lean very heavily on my board for these things. I recommend everybody do that, even if their board members say, I don't want to do fundraising. That's your job. You need to do that for the organization. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
And there's a question in the chat, but before we get to that, I just want to expand on what you were saying a little bit. How has that changed from when you were like a very baby organization and, maybe there wasn't as much delegation power, you just had to all work together at the fundraising effort?
Well, I think one of the reasons that we are so good at still having the board really involved in this, in the fundraising efforts, is that because not too long ago, they were the ones in charge of all of it. So there is a risk that when you bring on an executive director for the first time, or you start to have some actual staff running your organization, that the board maybe is a little burnt out and they take a big step back and they say, so-and-so has it now. I can walk away. I can go relax. We have had to, work through that at points and reinvigorate the board, but we've never fully lost it. If an organization is a bit more established and has kind of lost that connection, or that the board has lost their role in those activities, you have to put some work into making that happen. I find that my board members love to make those donor thank you calls. They hate to ask people for money, but they'll make the donor thank you calls, and that might be an inroad to start getting them involved in some fundraising activities that feels a little bit more comfortable for them, just as a suggestion.
That definitely makes sense. So really relying on the historical precedence of, the group effort and continuing that even as you expand. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but did you fully answer that question in the chat? Is that all set?
I think I did, but Amelia, if you want to elaborate at all.
No, you're spot on.
All right, so we will switch gears a little bit. And so what were some of the significant steps that you and Vines took or have taken to increase the robustness of your fundraising efforts?
The biggest thing is always learning, continuing to learn, continuing to attend webinars on our own, and learn about the best practices and then figure out how that works within our organizational culture. Early on with the organization, as we were starting to do more and more, we had some individuals here and there who made donations to us, but we weren't sending then an annual mail appeal. So we at one point just decided, you know what, let's just take the names of everybody who's donated to us. And now everybody on the board, all the site coordinators, everybody's going to think of 10 names each, and we're going to make a mailing list. And our first mail appeal maybe went to 50 people. But you know what? We brought in $3,000 through it. So, people can't donate money to you, or, well, people are not going to donate money to you unless you invite them to and make it possible for them to. And those mail appeals are really important. Now, it's important to also try to find a balance between how many you send per year and what works with your donor base. We only send 2 mail appeals a year. Some of you might be on a mailing list for a national organization like Sierra Club, and man, they hound you, right? You get letters all the time, you get phone calls, and that can be really off-putting, right? Because as a donor who might be giving them $25 a year, I feel like they're spending it all on just asking me for money again. And so, it's good to have some people that that are donors to even get some feedback on, what feels good to you. Don't ever be afraid to ask people for advice. There's a saying, ask for advice, you'll get money. Ask for money, you'll get advice. So always ask people for advice, and then hopefully they're also going to give you some money. So, and we've just gauged over time what makes sense for our donor base.
Yeah, and what are some of the tools or strategies that you've used to gauge that?
Yeah, really it's asking people and then also tracking how our donations or how our donation appeals are working. So I know that sending out a donation appeal in the beginning of the summer is better than the spring for us, because I've tracked that and seen how it has gone. I know that sending a donation appeal in the fall in November is better than December because of our experience. Now, getting it out anytime is better than no time at all, right? Also, people want physical mail for a request for a donation. Lots of people really want that. And we've learned through asking our donors, what's the most compelling way to receive that? We've increased the font size on our letters to 14 as a minimum. People really appreciate that. When we started printing them on a slightly heavier weight paper, people loved that. It just felt a little bit more legitimate than your regular printer paper. And then also, though, we make an appeal through our email list. Most people are still either going to make a donation because they received a letter, but the email is a reminder. So it's a way to then get that back up in front of people's eyes a couple weeks after you've sent out the letter. And if they didn't send in a donation yet, they'll remember that they meant to, and they'll go find that piece of paper and send something in. We accept checks. We have a donation form on our website that people can use their credit card through. And something that we've also focused on doing in the last couple of years is encouraging more recurring donations. So giving on a monthly basis, quarterly, or even setting up an annual recurring donation. And that has slowly grown over time. And every year I try to just pick up a couple more people who are going to make a monthly donation. And that amount is going to be more than over the year than what they would do if they wrote a check one time. Those are a couple of things.
Yeah, that's all very helpful. And it segues pretty well into this next question, which is just what are the easiest forms of fundraising to get or funding to get, and what requires the most planning?
I think the best bang for our buck / time, mail appeals. We do hold several events that are really valuable to us as an organization. So we have a farm to table dinner in the spring and in the summer, and we also have a bowling fundraising event. Fundraising events should bring in money. Like, I know that might seem like a no-brainer, but I know some organizations hold fundraising events that actually take a loss because they see it more as a friend-raising event, or they just hope that over time it's going to take off. I would just give this piece of advice on fundraising events is that personally, because it's so much work to put on fundraising events, you want to find the thing that can be yours, that can be special to your organization, work with your culture, and not be too much work to put on for the amount that you bring in. So I won't take on new fundraising events unless they will reach a minimum goal for us. Otherwise, if it takes me, say, 40 to 60 hours to put on one event that could bring in $10,000, I could put 80 hours into building up relationships with donors who could, over time, be giving me $10,000 a year. So think about it like that. Can you invest that time instead into relationships of individuals who will give you unrestricted dollars versus an event that makes you kind of want to like pull your hair out by the end, right? And you've lost track of all of your other work that you need to be focused on because this event comes up and it sucks everyone's time away for the week leading up to it at minimum, right? So, and then I'll make note of, you can use Facebook to raise money and have set up things in your own nonprofit account on Facebook, so that if somebody wants to start a donation or a fundraiser for their birthday in honor of you, you can have it set up to automatically thank them as soon as they create a fundraiser, have some simple text that will populate their Facebook post when they select your nonprofit to host a Facebook fundraiser for. One downside with Facebook fundraisers is that you don't get any donor information. So you can't thank the donors, you can't send them a thank you letter, you can't keep in touch with them. And so we will use this as a way to bring in some money, but when I do Giving Tuesday, I try to direct traffic to our website so I collect information and can build relationships.
That's really good advice. And going back to the events and catering events to match your culture and what you're trying to show. what's been the process for maybe trial and error in that way for Vines?
Yeah, so years ago we did a fundraiser that was like a craft auction. So we had a great relationship with La Veggio Roasteria when they had their coffee shop on Court Street, and they invented an idea for us and helped us run this event where people would pick up use like a coffee burlap sack, and then they'd make some kind of craft art out of that. People were really creative. They reupholstered chairs. They made, they painted on it, made beautiful artwork, all kinds of cool things like, sewed stuffed animals out of it. And then people would come on a day and go through and bid on the items. And then the winning bidder paid for the item, and that raised money for us. It brought in generally somewhere around $2,000 to $3,000. It wasn't a lot of work, but it was enough work that we decided at a certain point to not keep going with it. Plus, it started to get a little bit repetitive, and we didn't have enough people new coming every year that wanted more burlap items in their house, right? So we pivoted. We recognized that this wasn't the most efficient for us. And now we work to have like a balance of, say, a formal event, like our spring farm to table dinner that was at Remlick's is now at Lost Dog, a little bit more of a dress up event. It's, a full course meal. So it's going to be, our tickets are $90 a piece. It's expensive. It is a fundraiser, right? But that is not accessible to the people we serve or a lot of our volunteers. So when we decided to start a fundraiser just for our farm share program, we looked at models that would be more accessible to those who want to help us raise money. So we've created a garden bowl event. So it's a bowling fundraiser at Rippick's Carousel Lanes. Teams sign up for $15, the cost of renting the shoes, and then they help raise money. So then they do some of the fundraising. So it's like a distributed model of raising funds. So that is a really nice way for us to feel like, we can have some of these fancy farm to table dinners, but we can also have events that are a lot more casual. People can show up in jeans, and they can come with their kids, and it's a much more Vines like casual event than a gala.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you.
And it's a lot less work. So
Yeah.
just FYI, folks, like fun things are a lot less work if you can.
Yeah, and I'm sure having the annual recurring events, it has, some sort of format that you can easily follow.
Yes.
Which streamlines things.
Yes, the first year is the hardest because you have to figure it all out from scratch. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So another question that we have here is, what are some local grant resources for fundraising capacity building that you have used or can recommend to people on this call?
Yeah. We have, I have worked with some of the foundations before to provide some small stipends for me to go to conferences. So if you have a good relationship with one of the foundations and you want to invest in some capacity building, it's worth asking if they would consider some kind of stipend for something like that outside of their regular grant cycle. Like I said, though, you really have to have that good relationship with folks. Now that the Community Foundation has their smaller grants that they have on essentially a rolling basis, that's a really good source for some support. The area foundations used to chip in and provide money to NYCON, New York Council of Nonprofits. They have a capacity building, a mini grant fund, which they're not doing any longer, unfortunately, but we used that a number of times to pay for our first year of our donor database, or to invest in, some piece of software or something that we needed to build our capacity to be able to do this work. United Way is it has a capacity building funding source at this point. So I would say that there's both funds that are earmarked specifically for capacity building, but also develop those relationships so that when you have something specific in mind, you can go to a funder and say, hey, I just need $2,000 to send this new development person to this, national fundraising training. Like, they may do it for you. It's worth the ask.
Yeah. And do you have any examples of some of the most influential the capacity building initiatives that you have participated in or that Vines has taken on?
So I think the thing that really was the biggest game changer for us was getting a really good donor database system in place that not only was easy entry for us to learn, but they have a tremendous amount of videos, tutorials, etc. compiled. So we use Little Green Light. There's a lot of options out there. It costs us about $500 a year. Their library is extensive, and I have learned how to do everything through their library and their video tutorials. And when I have a new staff member come on, that is a resource for me. There are also, I recommend just, getting on email lists for organizations that provide training on nonprofit fundraising. So you always are getting information about free webinars. I have really enjoyed being involved with some of the national webinars on on community-centric fundraising versus donor-centric fundraising. I think for us, we were starting to work on creating that traditional model of making the donation process all about the donor. And we shifted a bit because we realized, what? No, it's not just about the donor. We don't need to make them the center of the universe. They need to see themselves as a part of this community that we are working with. And so instead, changing the lens, showing the connection of them to those that we serve, etc. So there's a lot of great information out there about community-centric fundraising that I recommend people could just Google, and you'll find the national organization that's working on this.
Yeah, that's a very interesting shift in general. Would you mind explaining why you decided to make that shift as an organization and how you began to make it more community-centric?
It really came down to somewhat of a philosophical preference on our part, that we don't want to become an organization that is, I don't know, just putting the lens so much on the donor that can then impact sometimes how you do your work. So it doesn't, I don't know, it's just a little insidious sometimes how it happens. Maybe you have a large donor who now all of a sudden you're worried about making them unhappy, right? Because of something that your organization has said, stood for, etc. And so for us, we decided that there were moments, especially around like the Black Lives Matter movement, where we wanted to make some statements and people were saying, well, what if that bothers our donors? And we said, well, equity is more important than one individual who's giving us $1,000 a year. The individuals in our community who we're serving need to hear that we are recognizing the struggle that they're going through. More than that one donor needs us to play to whatever their beliefs are. And so, but at the same time, how do we bring that donor along with us to better understand those struggles our community is going through? And one of the ways that you do that is through making storytelling really as, central to your fundraising efforts, so that people don't feel as separate, as distant from the reality of other people's lives, which is a problem in our current society, right? We're very isolated and siloed across, income levels, race, etc. So we can, through the way that we do fundraising, actually reduce some of the stigmas that I think are out there in the world in which we're operating as nonprofits.
Yeah, thank you. And that segues really well into another question of what are some workarounds for when you hit roadblocks with donors or funders? Where, maybe there's an ideological mismatch, or maybe they're just not excited about funding the same project and they want to see new things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think mission comes first, and to really bring yourself back to that all the time, whether it's, that you're even, I made a note of some tips for folks, and I'll highlight this now, which is that you should never chase money. The money should align with what you're doing. If you're finding yourself thinking about developing a new program because all of a sudden there's this funding available for something that maybe you've never even thought about, maybe you have, but now all of a sudden you're just going to do it because the funding is there. What happens when that money is gone? Is your organization committed to continuing that? But then also, like, what are you compromising to do that, right? We only have so much time, attention, etc. For grant writing, for example, right? So focus it on where it really aligns most with your organization. Same thing with individual donors. If you're compromising the focus of your organization to cater to a specific donor, you are going to lose something. So there are some individuals in this community that people have said, hey, you should try to ask them for money. And we've said, you know what? Culturally, we don't align. Maybe their business we don't align with. There may be some organizations that are really, that are very profitable, but some of their work really has some negative environmental impacts. I don't really want to be the recipient of that money and starting to maybe tame our messaging around sustainability and those things just to cater to that person and keep them giving us money. I think, the idea really is that if you're authentic and you are your organization, you are focused on your mission, that attracts people to you versus, trying to be something you're not, just to, inspire this one person that you're not aligned with to give you money once or twice,
Yeah, I think you've given some really good advice about when to step back or to be a little bit apprehensive with a donor that you might not align with. But what are some signs that you might be making inroads with a potential donor and it just maybe needs a little bit more time and investment?
Yeah, I have had some folks over time that are, kindly sending in $100 check annually. I know they have more capacity to give. And one individual in particular I can think of that just made $1,000 donation to us recently. He was that kind of donor that always gave $1,000 or $100 here, $100 there. The key thing was getting him to start coming to some of our events, and not necessarily fundraising events, our donor thank you events. So if you don't do this already, I highly recommend having some kind of a thank you event for donors. And we include volunteers in that also, because volunteers are donating to your organization with their time. And it's really great to have people who are giving money in the same room as people who are giving time, because those people who are giving time, like, they're your best spokespeople, right? And for us, a lot of our program members are also volunteers, so they get to meet a much more diverse group of folks than if it was just donors. So I think that the event that he came to this year, our donor party, really sparked something in him. And it's just that consistency every year. When he makes that $100 donation, having a board member thank him, myself writing a handwritten note on his thank you letter, having that really sense of a personalized connection to the organization. It was nice to see his donations slowly inch up over time. And now that he is making that larger donation, I'm going to make an effort to really make sure I know, like, his wife's name. If I get to know his dog's name, I'm going to remember his dog's name. It's just like, I want to connect to him as a person and identify what is his interest in the organization, what keeps him feeling connected, and I'm gonna focus time on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And so, I mean, given that there's such limited time in a day, especially for, small nonprofits that are maybe volunteer run, how much time do you think grassroots organizations should be devoting towards fundraising?
I think based on my timesheets I look at over the year where I'm spending my time across all of the different work areas, I'm putting between 5 and 10% of my time into fundraising. I am working to, through a new position, take certain things off of my plate so I can increase that. So it's going to change over time based on what your structure looks like, what your capacity is. I want to personally, for our organization, my interest is investing more in the individuals of my time in face-to-face time with the individuals who support us, versus more fundraising events. I think that has more potential for us. I can see I've got a couple of people that, I know I could call up at this point if I had a compelling ask and say like, hey, this is what we want to do. I don't have a grantor who will invest in this. Is this something that you could help us with? That is what you want to get to, right? You want to get to the point where you have people you can call up and say, could you make a $5,000, $10,000 donation? I'm not there. I'll be honest, I'm not there, but this is where I know I need to go. So I'm shifting resources to make it possible to get there. But if a small nonprofit can put even, 40 hours over the year into some fundraising efforts, you will make more than that back just through a simple mail appeal and an email appeal. It's not that hard, but on the back end, you need to make sure that you have a donor database set up, that you have a way to process that money and keep track of who's giving to you. You have to collect the data. If you don't collect the data on who's giving to you, you can't go back to them. You can't see how their relationship has changed over the years. So, go ahead, start asking for money, but at the same time, get your systems in place to track all of that information.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially given that you've kind of given us good information as, baby just started organizations, establishing that database, making sure that you have a donor base and tracking system, teenage organization where you're at of, really honing in on those donors and, setting the foundation there, and then, the projections for growth of, singling out specific donors who are on call and ready to give when needed. But yeah, so those are all of the questions that we have for you, but I'd like to open it up to everybody on the call, and there's one. So Micah, I'm just going to read it out if that's all right. So if your board isn't dedicating that time to fundraising, how do you compel them? How do you prioritize fundraising when the org is small and stuck in a rut only covering the day-to-day needs?
Yeah, I would bring in some outside educators. So see if you could get someone from Nikon to come speak to your board. Or if you aren't working with a nonprofit mentor for yourself, if you're an executive director and you're running a young organization, find one. Like, find somebody who can be your ally and who, when you need to spark something under your board, you can bring them in. So it's not just you. It is really kind of frustrating to be that person trying to tell your board all the time what they need to do. At a certain point, like, think about like kids and parents, right? Parents can tell their kids till they're blue in the face, this is what you need to be focusing on to succeed, or, you can give them all kinds of information. They get it from an outside person. they say, and they hear the same exact thing you've told them 5 million times, and all of a sudden they come home, they're like, oh, so-and-so told me this is what I should do. And you're like, yeah, really? Shocker. Like, yeah. So you need someone else sometimes to be that voice. And if you haven't done some strategic planning, that would be a good process to get the board to start thinking about, what do we really need to grow and what's the board's role in this? They need some education, and you should challenge them to educate themselves on board responsibilities. And if you can take 1 or 2 people from your board and win them over, they can now start saying those same things to everybody else. Ideally, your board chair is on board, is behind this, right? And they should be the one overseeing the board members to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But you can chip away and get some allies, and then it will grow. And if over time, the culture will shift.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? You can either unmute yourself and talk or just drop it in the chat.
I'm sure there are people in this room that have a lot to teach me, right? So one thing I'll just also say is, if you can get connected to other folks in the area who are doing this work to bounce ideas off of, it's super helpful. And it's, you might even find out like, oh, there's a much more affordable way to print my letters than who I was using, or there's this, like something that's going to make your life easier that could be really helpful. So just networking in the community is super helpful. And then attending webinars with through national trainings, etc. Like, then you can connect people around the country who are doing the work. But, everybody's tried out something that worked and something that's failed. And we can each learn something from each other through that.
Absolutely. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I'm not sure if you have any final thoughts, but I just, again, want to extend a huge thank you. And yeah, let you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And folks can feel free to reach out to me if you have some questions. And I think that it's super helpful that United Way is doing these kinds of trainings and networking events. So thank you. So it's for making it possible for us to connect better with each other, to learn from each other.
And thank you so much, Amelia, for that. And I'll make sure that everyone who attended today gets the recording, as well as Amelia's email if you think of any questions. So.
Thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to give a special shout out to Olivia Shimkus, because she's been on my screen and giving me some really good visual feedback and making me feel like energized throughout this and connected. So thank you.
Thanks. This was really informational. I really appreciated it.
You're welcome. All right. Well, take care, everybody.